Dunchbags, what's going on? It's Landon Remixes here, and I have Connor Whitmore, aka Nawtystep, here for a review of the debut album from Fox Stevenson, Killjoy. And how's it going, man?
Yeah, very well, thank you. Cracking on with the content as usual.
Oh, yes.
The electronic music review people, that we are. And yeah, doing well. Just excited to get into reviewing this album with you.
For sure. Yeah, I'm super excited too. Connor and I have been talking about reviewing this album for a little while. Was it the last time we recorded a review together? I don't even remember what it was. Which one? Keizo?
Yeah, Keizo, yeah, on my channel, yeah.
Yeah. And I think we talked about doing this one next because it's always fun to do videos together, get each other's perspectives. We often have very different perspectives, so I'd say it's always an interesting conversation when we open up the floor. But
yeah, I mean, I think we've kind of had a succession of I think it's been 3 things now that we've covered together, and I don't think we've ever both really enjoyed something. You know, granted, of course, we have had our different opinions, as you've said, usually quite varied, quite different. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it's rarely the case that we both really like something, and I'm curious as to whether that will be the case today. We could both not like it. Who knows? Me and Landon never actually tell each other what we think about what we're talking about at all. We keep it quiet beforehand as a kind of element of surprise kind of thing.
So I thought it might be a cool thing to kind of start out before we get into the actual review of Killjoy, how we were both introduced to Fox Stevenson, because I have a feeling we both had very different introductions to his music. So if you want to, kind of start out, tell me your experiences with him in the past and how you got introduced to him. That'd be cool.
Well, it was actually completely random, and I think it may have even been before I started really getting into electronic music. I could be wrong about that, but I'm pretty sure that I heard one of his songs on a video game.
Really?
I could be wrong, but have you heard of Tico?
Yeah.
So I'm pretty sure that I heard that on a video game of some sort, and I was just like, wow. It may have even been one of the songs that kind of sparked or even furthered, one of the first songs that really furthered my interest in electronic music. And I was just like, wow, kind of blew me away. I was so taken aback by the joyousness of it, and I was just like, this is really, something that I want to explore more. I might be getting my timeline a bit muffled up there or muddled up, but that's what I remember of it. And then from there, it was pretty on and off in terms of like following his music, because when I first heard that song, I wasn't very rigorous or religious with my keeping up with finding stuff. I was only just getting into it. But then, we get onto like his Disciple EPs, and I was like, that was when I started really getting into like the heavier types of electronic music. And I was like, oh, okay, he produces for Disciple, I'll give that a look. And then all of those EPs, and then we have standouts, of course, like Miss You. And then that kind of leads up to the last couple of years where we've had his amazing, 2018, last year, with tracks like, Peace of Mind, Out on My Own. That kind of leads up to now, I suppose. I mean, he hasn't been someone that I have, as I mentioned earlier, like, really been that rigorous or religious in my upkeep with checking his stuff out. But now, doing what I'm doing, obviously, yeah, I'm at that point where anything that comes out from him, I hear it straight away, sort of thing. So, yeah, I would say that's kind of where I'm at with my experience of his music.
So that's funny, because I actually expected you, because you're based in the UK, I kind of imagined that you would have been introduced to him earlier on through like, Stan SB and some of his like early drum and bass stuff. That's funny that you say Tico, or is it Tycho or Tico? I have no idea.
Yeah,
what the correct.
Absolutely no idea. The only
I've always said Tycho, but
oh, you've always said Tycho. Fair enough.
I was gonna say, funny enough, like I think our experiences are actually more similar than I imagined, because my introduction to him was Sweets on Spinnin' Records. So that very
See, I don't even know
sonically
that
similar song. Really? Okay.
Yeah, I've never. I don't even know it. I've never heard it. So
it's very similar. Very
Okay.
like same style. So
Okay.
but yeah, he followed up because Tycho. I'm just gonna say Tycho because that's how I
Just say
have
it.
said it. But yeah, right, because that song released on Circus on their. It was like a compilation album with a lot of different like electro
that one. Yeah,
and things
yeah,
like that.
Yeah.
But
That's the
then
one. Yeah.
quickly after that, Spinnin' signed him, and he released a bunch of releases there. But the first one was Sweets, and that was around the time that I was like really into Big Room, and the more mainstream like electro and progressive type labels, Protocol, Spinnin', Revealed, labels like that.
Mm-hmm.
So this Sweets kind of came out as a mystery track, and I had no idea what it was. It was like, this is such like a weird and cool track at the same time, and everyone was saying, oh, it's Fox Stevenson, because it literally sounds just like Tycho. Like they're so similar, it's not even funny. But to this day, that song is still my favorite work of his. And I've had a similar experience through the years, like following his Disciple releases. The last couple years, I think especially, have been really cool. Although I'd say my favorite era of his is probably his house era, like Tycho Sweets, his remix of I Want You to Know by Zed, all like some of my favorite releases by him. But I have quite enjoyed his more recent stuff as well. So yeah, I got into him more for the instrumental stuff rather than like the vocal drum and bass dubstep.
Right. Yeah. Of course. Yeah, that sounds about right. It's a good point that you raised earlier about like being surprised that I hadn't, become aware of his stuff earlier. It's completely true. Like honestly, he seems to me, for my personal, kind of appreciation of his music, he seems for me like one that's kind of slipped through the cracks, if you will. Maybe I had it in the back of my mind the whole time that he wasn't a strictly heavy musician, as we both know, as everyone knows. So maybe I didn't go out of my way as much to kind of follow his stuff in the same way that I was following, I don't know, all the other Disciple people or the Never Say Die people, for example. Because I was aware that he was, fleeting and jumping between Spinnin' and all these other labels. So maybe that's probably why I didn't follow him as much.
Yeah, for sure. It can be super challenging to follow an artist when they're just so all over the place. And he definitely has been. Like, I probably couldn't even name all the different labels and genres and whatever else he's gone into. I feel like there are tying threads in his music, and we can talk about that as we get into this album, Killjoy. So I guess I wanted to ask if you have any like initial thoughts about this album, like overarching, I guess, opinions. What's your first reaction to this thing? I'm
gonna start by saying it's actually really nice to critique something that isn't heavy for the most part. I never thought I would be in this situation, and I hoped I would be, because I've listening to this album and actually analysing it in a kind of critical way, I've never ever done that before. So, having this opportunity to do another collab review and have it not be something overtly heavy, I think is a great thing. But as we've said, I've enjoyed a lot of the stuff he's released over the last couple of years, and I really wondered on the back of that, especially considering for me how good his year last year was, how heavy this album would be. There's actually a massive difference between my first listen of this album and my second listen. With my initial run through of the album, hardly any of it really stood out to me. I found a lot of it quite meh, and I didn't think it sold itself all that well, considering his year that he had last year. I saw it as quite a crash from that year, comparatively. Not to say that I was expecting a completely heavy album, but I definitely felt like it could have had more of it. And also that, you know, taking that into account, a lot of the songs do, or did on that first listen for me, blend into one. Yeah, a load of stuff that was just a bit flat and wet and not really offering enough. I was really wondering, you know, is this just me being a basshead? Is this just me being a, you know, predominantly dubstep, drum and bass house, trap reviewer sort of thing? But I've liked music like this a lot in the past. It wasn't anything to do with that. It was just on that first listen, I was straight up really not enjoying it. Stuff that I couldn't really believe he'd put together, considering, again, as I've said, how much I enjoyed his stuff last year, how heavy that was. And compared to this, compared to this stuff, I just saw this as a massive kind of dip or kind of fall, if you will. But then, going on to my second listen, I realised a load of these vocal performances are actually fantastic. A lot of the instrumentation is really good. Whilst there is still some of it that I do find quite flat and meh and a bit cringeworthy, even, you just can't really produce an album of Out on My Owns and Peace of Minds and Misuse and so on. Yep. I think overall, even though I do think this album lacks in significant parts, I definitely like it much more on my second listen and my third listen, and I assume, or I imagine, that I will like it even more going forward as I check it out again and again.
Yeah, I mean, you pretty much hit exactly how I was feeling about the album, actually, strangely enough.
Are we agreeing? Are we agreeing?
Yeah,
on something?
Yeah. I'm not sure if we'll agree on like track specifics, but on my first listen through, you know, I went into the album basically with the only song I had heard being Go Like, and that kind of being like Miss You, Out on My Own type style.
Exactly.
And I went into that with kind of the expectation that there was going to be more of that.
Yep.
And you know, like going through the thing, a lot of the songs, it's like you're hearing just like, you know, it's pop music effectively.
Yeah.
Especially on my first listen, it was like, you know, like I feel like he could go so far beyond this and do so much better. But as I've like gone through the album on repeated listens, I've probably listened through it maybe 6 times at this point or something like that. I have found to enjoy the album, you know, more and more with every passing listen, because even though like a lot of the songs do fall into a very like pop formula, and a lot of it is somewhat like generic, I guess you'd say. It kind of sounds like it's structured off of the pop music that was coming out like 10 or 15 years ago in a lot of places. But as I've come to, you know, listen to it more and more, you notice like the subtleties in the production, the way he approaches the music with his production background is actually really cool. Like you said, some of the songs here I do kind of think a little cringy on some of the lyric fronts, and some of the songs, just the instrumental, I guess, like the way the instrumentals are worked together just seems a bit basic for him. But I also like that the project is so varied, because, you know, like you said, I wouldn't have liked an entire album by him that's just Miss You and Out on My Own and Go Like, those style like melodic dubstep, I guess you'd say. His like unique approach to that, I feel like it would get really overdone, and that this album would not be a like fun listen if it was just like that. Whereas what we actually got in the final product is a very varied, well blended electronic like pop rock album.
There's always a thing for me of you can say that an album either has a theme or that it does something too much. And for me at the moment, I'm still on the negative side of that, in that I appreciate it has that pop rock theme running through it, as you say, but for me, it still doesn't have enough of the heaviness considering what he's done before, and also considering, as you said, the single that he released, you know, that got the most traction before the album was out in full was Go Like, and that is, you know, it's not a carbon copy in any respect, but it's the same sort of vibe as all of those fantastic singles that he put out last year. And so I'm like, oh, okay, he's put out another one. Hopefully the LP will be based around that approach and that delivery. Whilst I do, as I said, appreciate the theme of it and the consistency of the production and the approach, almost the mood of it and the emotion of it, I do think he almost does himself a bit of a disservice in not having as many or enough heavy songs on it. You know, there's part of me that thinks he should have reserved one of A Piece of My Mind or Out on My Own and just saved one of them for this album, and maybe substituted one of the songs from this album out and released it last year. But yeah, I'd love to know kind of what you think of that.
So I guess with listening to the album more and more and kind of familiarizing myself with the themes, you know, like I said, with my initial listen and your initial listen, what you kind of expect is that we're going to get more like bass music kind of influenced stuff. And as I've come to familiarize myself with the album, it's more like I come into it with the expectation that I'm going to be listening to a pop album with some like bass music elements, with some like drum and bass, with a little bit of rock, with like a little bit of electro, you know, those types of things. So it's not something that really like disappoints me all that much. I mean, there's enough like dance influence here. Like there's like 3 or 4 songs on this album that are like drum and bass, you could say, like, you know, drum and bass mixed with pop. And then, you know, you've got Go Like, which is effectively a dubstep song. And I guess a lot of them, it would be like harder to approach it and see like the electronic elements, but it's like just enough for me, I guess I'd say. While I do somewhat agree with you that it would have been cool to see some of the singles, like the Disciple released singles, or like Bruises, end up on this album. To kind of refute that, I'd also say that this album has a very specific theme lyrically that's going on. All of the songs, I feel like, fit that theme somewhat in a way that you kind of can't swap a lot of the things here out for the stuff that he was doing prior, like last year. Even though sonically it would have been cool to see a little bit more of that, I think most of the songs here just make sense in the album's context, I guess.
Yeah, for sure. I agree with that fully. Would you say that you have an overarching or like a general opinion of the lyrics, or does it take really, you know, examining them from song to song? Because, well, yeah, actually, I'd like to know what you think first, and I'll kind of see if I can go off that.
So, yeah, the album, I didn't really pick up on it all that much on my first listen, and like the theme of Killjoy, I guess, kind of runs through the entire thing, because, and like I said, I didn't really get this on my first listen, but as I started getting into it more, you realize that like a lot of these songs are very happy and poppy and bright, dancey, fun, kind of like party songs, but then you listen to the lyrics and they're just like so dark, like,
yeah, for sure,
for a good chunk of the way through the album. You take a song like OK, which to me kind of sounds like your pop version of Tycho, in my opinion. He kind of goes for that sound a little bit, and it's nice and fun, feels like a happy party song, and then you get toward the end of it and he's like, daddy makes his money selling guns to drug dealers, and it's just like, what on earth?
Yeah, I know.
like, and that happens on a lot of this album. Like, we just get these songs that on the surface just, you know, feel like party songs, and then you dig a little deeper and it's like, wow, what he's actually talking about is like very dark and kind of like depressing. So the theme of Killjoy makes sense because you have this like overarching joy sonically in the album, and then he just like kills it with like the lyric aspect. So I'd say there are some songs, like, let's take, for example, Cavalier. I don't care for the lyrics all that much. Like, it feels very, like, out of his normal headspace. You know, like, Here to Break Necks. That doesn't seem like the the type of thing like Fox Stevenson is normally about. Like he seems to be mostly about like emotions and happiness, and then that song is just like a kind of a step in the opposite direction. Yeah, there are a couple other songs, but for the most part it's like it's very like happy and fun and bouncy, and then, you know, with the lyrics he tends to take a darker approach, which I like, for like a good chunk of the album.
Do you think, or do you feel like the way he delivers the vocals ever gets in the way of the message and any kind of mood or feeling or emotion you get from it? Because for me, that's the problem I have with it. I really, really enjoy kind of what you were saying. I really, really like the majority of the lyrical content here. I think it's, you know, considering how bad it could have been, the off lyricism that we get in electronic music for the most part, you know, very generic, very boring, uninspired. I think a lot of the stuff here is actually really good, but the way that he delivers it still gives it that kind of teenage, like it's too much of a teenage sort of spring break gleam to it. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, I can for sure see that.
The weird way that I put it is that it reminds me of being at uni. It brings me right back to a time a few years ago of going out a lot with people that I made friends with at university, and, you know, listening to this kind of music, and like that was the kind of music that all the clubs played that you went to. However, that music I didn't really, you know, take all that seriously, and I think I have a similar issue here because of the delivery. Yeah, I mean, because of the delivery of it, not necessarily the lyrical content, which I, as I said, really enjoy.
Yeah, it makes sense. I think part of it is that, and I could be wrong about this, but I think he's kind of trying to appeal to that audience a little bit, like kind of trap them in the frame of like, oh, like super like catchy, you know, catchy party lyrics and, or, you know, vocals, and they kind of get trapped into that. And then when you like sing the lyrics out loud, you kind of think like, hold up a second, hold on. I don't know, like on some of the songs, certainly I don't think the vocal performances are all that great. Some of them are even like quite annoying to me, like on Hold Steady. I did not care for his vocals on that song. Yeah, some of them it's just the vocal melodies and the performances just didn't interest me all that much. But for the most part, I don't think it gets in the way of my enjoyment of it, because it kind of takes me into that atmosphere, like the, you know, the clubby, college party, whatever atmosphere, but then also hits me in the side of the head with that existential dread that hangs over the entire project. So yeah, I wouldn't say it's like a huge issue for me. It's something that's concerning mildly, and on a couple tracks majorly.
With Hold Steady, I've got written here for that song. She's gonna marry a rich old man, and then ... cocktails. And I wrote those two things because it was just by that point on my second listen, by the 10th song, Hold Steady, by that point that I kind of realised the amount that he was using lyrics like that and talking about stuff like that. And that was that is the only drawback that I have with the lyrics overall. It's just so much talk of like, you know, sugar daddies and like margaritas and stuff like that. And I'm just like, man, too much information is a phrase that you reserve for someone being a bit crude or something like that. But really, with this, it's like listening to his diary or something at points. Do you know what I mean? It's like, you know, just rein it in a little bit. Those were the points where I felt the cringe was just a little bit too much, but I don't think we get that often.
Yeah, I can definitely see that on certain parts of it. It's like, did you really have to go that far?
Yeah.
But otherwise, it really doesn't get in the way all that much for me. I want to get your thoughts on this. I feel like Killjoy would have made more sense as the first track on this album. This is like a minor, very minor issue that I had. But for me, it kind of has, like, it introduces, I feel like, the themes of the album. really nicely. It kind of has like a sort of depressing sound to it. Yeah, it just sounds more like an intro to me. It's shorter, I think, too, probably the shortest track on the album, if I'm remembering correctly. Yeah, it's like 4 seconds shorter than OK. For me, it would have just made more sense in the first spot, and I can kind of see why they put Out My Head, because it's, you know, it's got that like fun groovy bass line. It's like a nice like dance party song, and it makes sense why they'd put that at the beginning of the album, so people who are listening are like, oh, this is cool, this is fun. And then I feel like just the ordering with that and then Killjoy, like it literally like Killjoy kind of kills the mood that song brings, and then it kind of brings it back up with Broken Man. So did you have any thoughts about that?
Are you not therefore kind of agreeing with your past self in that Killjoy is bringing the album back down emotionally, and that is what the album is about, right? That's the theme, what you were talking about earlier.
Yeah.
So in that sense, it kind of makes sense, no? To have the really joyous opening, like luring you in, oh yeah, happy-go-lucky, fun and games, all of that, and then bringing it right back down again.
Yeah, I see what you're meaning. That could be taken kind of hypocritical.
No.
But
it's just like,
I just think it would have like flowed better. And like, yeah, I mean, that would make sense if that was subliminally what was going on, but I feel like with the album story and everything that's going on, and like it doesn't do that with every track. I mean, it would make more sense to me if after like every big moment he was just like, oh, depression, anxiety, and the world's terrible, or something like after every big moment, but it doesn't happen like that. It just happens right after Out My Head. So I feel like that was more of a choice to like get people hooked and then kind of put the intro track in after that, rather than that being like an intentional you know, play on the album's title. I could be wrong, but that's just how it feels to me.
Something that I was going to mention earlier actually was linking to what we've said so far, is that I thought this album was lacking a song like that was just a bit too miserable and a bit just a bit dark, and I hadn't even forgotten about that song. And I think that says a lot about that song, in that for me, and what I've written here for Killjoy is I don't think it's quite subtle enough, because like he goes ham with the whole joyousness and happiness for pretty much the rest of the album, that I think he could have gone the complete opposite end of the spectrum with that song. For me, even though it is like the antithesis of so much of the album, it doesn't go quite far enough. And I think maybe could have been even further down the album to really kind of give a moment of reflection and allow us to take in all of the happy stuff that's come beforehand and reflect on it, as opposed to having it so early on. I suppose in answer to your earlier question of whether I would in fact have had it above Out of My Head and at number 1 in the track listing, I'd say I would probably have it even, you know, far further down than where it is on the track list. So even in doing that, it would have given it a bigger impression and standing within the album overall. And for me, even though I like the spaced out kind of vibe of it, it's hazy, it's dreamy, it could have done with being more subtle and maybe at a later point on the LP.
Yeah, I would somewhat agree with you there. I think if not in the track 1 spot, I think it would have made more sense to be like an interlude, maybe halfway through the album, where you get through all of these like kind of happy tracks, and then it's like, oh, kind of look back and notice like a lot of this is really dark. Personally, how I probably would have liked it is for it to be a little bit more subtle and be in track 1, so that you kind of like a what's it called, like a prelude kind of during like a Shakespeare play, when you kind of get the themes of what's going on in the play beforehand, so you're able to recognize the themes as they kind of come throughout the project. I think it would have made sense as track 1 or as a like softer reflection halfway through the album. I think either of those would make more sense than just being right at track 2 to me. So that's kind of how I feel about it. But let's talk about tracks we liked here, particularly. I guess give me like your top like 4 or 5.
Yeah, for me, number 1 is absolutely Go Like. I think for me that is like the clearest extension of all the fantastic material that we got from him last year. The energy of it, the vibrancy of it, the heavy kind of gleam to it, which makes it quite unique within the album. The main riff, I think it's a riff. Would you call it a riff? The whole... Yeah, it's just fantastic. There's still a slightly cringe element to it with the lyrics, but for me, the drops are absolutely brilliant, musically and sonically. Beyond that, I really like the penultimate song, Perfect Lie. Got a bit of a spring break feel to it, as I mentioned earlier, but it also reminds me a lot of Tycho or Tico. And that was, of course, the first song that got me into his music, so I really like it for that. Really nice vocals in that song. The drops are pretty joyous. And yeah, it's just got a nice... summery, poppy EDM feel to it. And I don't listen to all that much music of that kind anymore because I just don't have time. And so hearing that was quite a refreshing thing for me. But yeah, beyond that, I like Dreamland as well. Quite a catchy, infectious feel to that one. Kind of pop, drum and bass delivery. I think we were talking about that earlier. But yeah, some really nice sounds in there. And I think it's really well cut and rounded off really well in terms of the structure of it. And sonically, I think it kind of fires off in all directions as well, which is just great.
For sure.
I think I have those 3 as my absolute standouts, I'd have to say. Beyond that, a lot of them are kind of on a similar level. And then I have like a maybe bottom 4, 5, maybe 3 or 4 that are just a bit too cringeworthy and corny for me to really properly sit through, I'd have to say.
We can talk about that in a second.
Yeah.
So there are definitely a couple that I'm not all that into. But
sure.
I gotta say, I really like Out My Head. Like I mentioned before, just a super fun song, like killer bass line that just gets you like dancing. And then, like I guess the drop is really, really fun too. Okay, like I mentioned before, kind of similar to how you said with Perfect Lie, it reminds me a lot of Tycho. And yeah, I don't know, it's just like a fun, like kind of poppy take on that, because I feel like he did really well using the vocoder.
Vocoder.
He uses like a vocoder in the like background of that, and I feel like the blending of that with the vocals, especially in the verses, are really good. And then just like the switch up where it's got a more poppy beat instead of like the just regular 4 on the floor feel that his songs from that era kind of brought. The only thing I don't care all that much about the track is, I think you mentioned this a little bit before, like tequilas and margaritas and senoritas and all that stuff. It just feels a little bit too over the top for me. But yeah, other than that, if I can somewhat ignore the hook there in the drop, I think it's a really great song. Brings back a lot of nostalgia because it reminds me of those early days when I was getting into his music.
Yeah.
And I think it's also like a really cool thing on his part. You listen. This is just me sidetracking here for a second. You listen through this album and you get these like small hints of different legs of his career, I guess. And I think that's part of the reason that the fact that Go Like is the only one of its kind on this project, that I kind of don't, it doesn't really bother me that much, because like a lot of these songs are just like subtle hints and references to different legs of his career that I could come to appreciate, I suppose. Like you, I also really like Dreamland. It's got a lot of different things going on. I saw a comment on YouTube where someone was saying, I think it was on like the Liquicity upload of this, and it was like they felt like it was like the perfect representation of Fox Stevenson, because it has those old like drum and bass elements from Stan SB and his early drum and bass stuff, the more melodic leg, and then like the pop elements and those types of things that he's weaved into his more recent music. And I'd kind of have to agree with that. Like, it's just such like a fun song, even though it is kind of dreadful in some of its lyric content. It is just like such a fun melodic song. Kind of weaves in maybe some like pop punk elements, which I thought was really cool. My first listen through this song was actually, he posted like a live video promoting his forthcoming tour, the Dreamland live tour, and they played this song, and it's really cool watching it like just be performed on like drums and guitar and vocals, and it still sounds like really good too. But then when you hear the studio version that's on this album, it's just like a really cool like melodic drum and bass tune that weaves in those pop rock type elements in a really cool way, I think. I also like Go Like, much like you. In more recent listens of the album, Dreamland, I'd say has been my favorite, but my first couple listens, Go Like, was certainly the one there. I like the kind of, I don't know, I guess it's got kind of like a reggae-ish like bass line at the beginning that I think catches really nicely. And then, you know, like we've already talked about, it kind of has that Miss You, Out on My Own type sound to it that works really well. Really, I mean this, really my only complaint about the song is that the lead melody sounds very much like The Island Part 1 by Pendulum to me. Because
I hadn't even thought of that. Usually with those kind of things, like, they just spring to my mind straight away, and I'm like, no, that's too similar. I don't like this song straight away. I don't like it. But that's really weird. I hadn't thought of that. Hadn't sprung to mind. Yeah, that's interesting.
I haven't seen that many people talk about it, but it's something that like, and it's not like the melody is quite as repetitive as The Island, and he like switches it up. But it was like the very first time I heard that song, I was like, this melody sounds so much like The Island. So that's just like stuck with me, and it makes me feel bad because like it's such a fantastic song beyond that. To me, really, really well put together. It's just like that's something that I heard and that I just haven't been able to let go of. And it's not even like a criticism. It's just like it drags down my enjoyment just a little bit because it's like, you know, Immersion is one of my favorite albums, like of all time. So it's just like it seemed so like there to me, and it's hard to enjoy it to its maximum
I feel
potential.
You on that.
But yeah, those I'd say are really my favorites. I think I named 4 there. So
yeah,
since we were already kind of on the topic, on the other hand, are there any songs that you are really feeling like negative?
I'm gonna start with California. I really, as I've said, I appreciate Killjoy for what it is, and then suddenly we get another song kind of halfway through. At the beginning, kind of promises that it's going to be a more quiet number, sandwiched in between all of this really outgoing, happy, full of life stuff. But then it just turns into another one of those kind of boy band imitations, and one of the notes that I've got for this song is like, okay, yeah, I've been able to bear a lot of the lyrical content before this and kind of after as well, but this one I feel like I can laugh at a bit. The lyrics are just far too cheesy for me, and yeah, that whole thing of just too much information. It's like, you're really, I appreciate, you know, writing lyrics as if it's like a book, as if you're kind of detailing everything that you can see, and you know, remarking on little individualities and kind of idiosyncrasies that people have, and you know, the way that people are, and you know, the understandings that we have of certain stereotypes and whatnot, you know, which he really goes in depth on across the album, which is good. But yeah, some of it is just, I can't remember specific words, but for me to have written that would have taken quite a lot, because up to that point I didn't write it. And yeah, the last thing I've said for that song is that it just sounds like a Miley Cyrus track or something like that. Just like,
I could see that.
That was the main kind of, that was my summation of it.
Can I talk about that one while we're on the subject? I don't mean to cut you off.
No, go ahead, yeah.
So California, I think it's not, like I mentioned, it's not one of my favorites on the album by any stretch, not one of my top positions, but I think it's an interesting song. Sonically, kind of reminds me of a lot of the stuff on Owl City's latest album, because that one, cinematic, it was very like biographical or autobiographical, I guess you'd say. And this song kind of takes on that same thing, like you were saying. It's like a book where he's kind of narrating everything that's going on. But I think the album has an interesting twist, like we see on a lot of Killjoy, where, you know, a lot of people, when they write about California, they write about, you know, how great it is, the sun, the babes, you know, like the parties, all the different stuff. But he kind of takes this look at it about, like, you know, pursuing your dreams, going to California, and then finding out that it actually like kind of sucks. And that's not me personally saying that, but that seems what he's like kind of trying to get across with the lyrics. Like, you know, everybody wants to be rich and famous, and like, you know, they're telling you to give up on your dreams in your mid-20s, and all this stuff. It's just like it's just such a real thing that exists in like that sphere, because there are so many people who, like, you know, drop everything to pursue their dreams in like LA. I know so many producers who like move to LA to, you know, try to make their dreams come true. And then California, he kind of gets into it, and he's like, yeah, this place ain't all it's cracked up to be. Like,
right.
You think when you're going here it's going to be all like sunshine and fun and accomplishing your dreams, but it really starts to take like a darker turn, like a lot of this album does.
Yeah, I feel that.
That's really all I'd have to say about it. But you can continue.
No, I appreciate all of that. Well, it's actually never been the case for me that I've really had to properly analyze the lyrical content across an album, you know, 10 plus songs, and so I'm still kind of getting used to the whole thing of remembering to look at the lyrics as well as, you know, what he's actually saying, as opposed to how it's making me feel on the surface, kind of thing. But yeah, now that you've said that about that song, it will make me listen to it differently. Cavalier, I found a bit of a mess, really. Some nice instrumentation in there, but not really offering all that much for me. The choruses I found just off straight up, like bringing everything together. Use Me, I found just to be another kind of child-friendly rom-com kind of song. The kind of song that you would put over like a summary montage in a film when a guy's just split up or had an argument with his girlfriend, and he's kind of like walking around Paris in a really forlorn way and kind of looking at the ground and this and that. And I just couldn't help but think about that kind of montage, or like bringing together of different semi-miserable scenes that just fit it perfectly in my head. And so
you know, that experience seems very specific. Is there something you're not telling us?
No, it's just from certain films that I've watched, and and yeah, no, I feel like I've trapped myself somewhat. But no, that was 100% the kind of the feeling that I got from it. Yeah, I think that song was maybe the epitome of the negative feeling that I have about the album. My main one being that, yeah, some of it I just can't really take all that seriously. Yeah, All Night I wasn't that big on. Yeah, just another one of those I neither really enjoy or really don't enjoy. Same with Headlights, really. Although Headlights I think I enjoyed more than I didn't enjoy. And that was actually, not to kind of change the whole, you know, flow of what we're talking about from what we didn't to what we did enjoy, but the ending of that to kind of round off the album I think is really good. And that was one of the moments actually where I did, with it being at the end of the album, reflect on what he was saying, because it was just like, you know, I think he says something like he's reminding himself that he's all right. And to think that this whole album is kind of like an angst or worry about all these different things that he's gone through, that he's experienced, and that he's trying to relay to other people. Yeah, for him to say that at the end, that he can remind himself that he's all right, is just a really welcoming and nice thing to hear, considering the kind of troubles that he clearly goes through and that he presents to us throughout the whole thing.
Yeah, I can totally see that. While we're on the topic of Headlights, yeah, I think it's a really great closer to the album. The beginning of the song, strangely enough, reminded me of like Sea of Voices by Porter Robinson.
Okay.
In like a strange way, it kind of has that like atmospheric,
high praise,
like, pretty. It's a cool song for sure, and then I like how it kind of switches into the bright, like melodic drum and bass kind of sound. I think it's a great way to cap off the album, especially when you consider like his career as a whole, like the type of music he's generally known for. I think it was a really great way to cap off his first album, technically. Going back to tracks I didn't care so much for, I'm going to have to... I think I already mentioned a little bit about Cavalier. Kind of the image that I have in my head is that Fox Stevenson is kind of like a teddy bear, you know, generally with his music. He's like kind of soft and cute and like melodic and fun. And then this song is just like Seth MacFarlane's Ted.
Yeah, and that makes sense.
I hope that comparison kind of makes sense.
Yeah, no, it does.
Because it's just like he just doesn't seem like the type of guy who's like, oh, I'm gonna break necks and throw your crap into next year. I'm going fist first into this or whatever. It's just like, it seems so strange coming from him. And yeah, I mean, this song amongst others on the album, it's like I can really appreciate the production behind it, and it's like I wish the instrumental paired with like a better vocal, but it's just like this isn't the type of song that I can even remotely take seriously.
Yeah. And
then I already mentioned I didn't care for Hold Steady all that much, and that's mostly for like, it might be like the repetition, the vocal, just like it just feels like it feels a little like whiny to me. So you'd mentioned Use Me before, and I'd say that's probably in like the bottom half of the album for me, but it's not one that I'd particularly say is one of the worst. Strangely enough, it kind of reminded me of like an Ed Sheeran sort of tune.
Oh yeah.
It definitely kind of gave me that vibe, but I don't know, I feel like it has like a nice positive message to it that, you know, I can get behind. It's kind of like an encouragement to, you know, like a friend that who's going through something, saying like, you know, I'm here for you, I'm always there for you, and if you need to use me in like a way of like, you know, venting or telling me about your feelings or getting things off of your chest, then don't feel like you have to hold that back. And that's something that's encouraging to me. I've been through, you know, I'm sure you have too, but I've been through dark periods in my life where it just feels like you need a friend, and this song was encouraging to me. Sonically, definitely not my favorite tune on the project, but one thing that I wanted to bring up, and I don't know if you've looked into this at all, but Nightwatch, you know, aka Noisia, had apparently a pretty significant hand in this album. Yeah.
I had no idea.
Yeah.
Okay.
Don't necessarily trust Wikipedia, but I'm on the Wikipedia page. I've heard a few different things. I've heard that they co-produced all of the songs. Right here on Wikipedia, it says they produced or co-produced all of the songs except 3 and 5, which would be Broken Man and Cavalier.
Cavalier, yeah.
And I've also heard that they just like mastered the album. So honestly, I'm not totally sure, but when I listen to it, it is like I can hear some of that influence across the project. Very clean, pristine mix downs across the thing. Love listening to it in that regard, hearing all the different, I guess, like frequencies, the different, you know, frequency spectrums kind of coming out when you listen to each of it. Because especially like in terms of bass, when you kind of just sit back and listen to the album in that regard, I think it's got, you know, you're not doing yourself any favors if you're not listening to this album on like some nice speakers or nice headphones, because I feel like it's got a great like spectrum.
For sure, yeah.
But yeah, I just wanted to see if you noticed like that at all. But
I mean, I have written a fair bit that Yeah, it was like there were particular moments where it just kind of stood out to me how well it was put together. But it wasn't as if I was like, oh, this was probably, someone else having a hand in that, because I've heard so much of his stuff before that has also been really well put together and kind of produced and assembled. So I didn't really think twice in that respect. So yeah, that's it. That's very interesting. But no, I would say that I did notice how clean a lot of it was, even though some of it isn't. I think there are a couple of times where I've written that snare is off, for example, which kind of stops me from enjoying it properly. But no, I think for the most part, yeah, it is very well put together, for sure.
So yeah, when it comes to this album overall, I think I've already talked about this a bit in this review thus far, but I think it's a really well-balanced mix of, pop, rock, and the types of electronic music Stanley has gone down in the past. Really cool to see certain elements of different periods of his career appear on this album in different, minor ways. I thought it was subtle but cool. And yeah, I think generally even if some of the songs feel a little bit, I feel like I've heard this formula used, I also feel like he has a different approach to it, like he does with most of his music, with his dubstep or his house music. He just has a different way of kind of bringing the elements forward in the production aspect. And yeah, I think it's a really nice, well-rounded album. Has enough drum and bass and dubstep, a little house to make me feel like I'm listening to a Fox Stevenson project, while at the same time pursuing this new direction that is more poppy and I guess radio friendly. So I'd say it's a really solid listen. It's the type of project that I feel like I can appreciate more and more every time I get into it, as I dig into the lyrics more, as I dig into the subtleties and the production. I think it's just a really solid album, one that I could see myself coming back to time and time again. But what do you think?
I agree with a lot of what you said. I think it's very multifaceted. I like how many different types of electronic music he goes for, and also melding that with pop so readily across the 13 songs. It is one that I think once you know what it's about and what it's good for, that when you go into it for the next time, you enjoy it more. Because, what I was saying at the start, on my first listen, hardly enjoying it at all. Second listen, really kind of becoming aware of its selling points, what it's good for, all the little things that make it what it is, kind of give it its character and personality. On the third listen, being able to just listen to it in the background, and from then on, I think the more I listen to it, I'll find out more and more about what I enjoy about it. Looking forward, as we were mentioning earlier, to really properly digging into what he says across the album. And yeah, it is undeniably corny and a bit overtly poppy and kind of almost cringeworthy at points, but I almost feel bad in saying that, because this album really does just feel to me like him truly being himself. And so for me, kind of knowing that and feeling that, getting that impression from it, makes me enjoy it a lot more, because, it is him just doing his thing, and I really, really like that about it. So
for sure,
as off as I find some of it, at its core, I find myself really enjoying the heart of it, the soul of it. It feels very, as I said, genuine and pure, like it's really come from somewhere true within him. And yeah, I touched on this earlier as well, but it's a mad thing to produce and sing on an album and put that all together and try and make it cohere in some sort of way. So yeah, I think overall, whilst on the surface I don't think it is quite for me, there is a lot that I can get from it and I think similar to you, as I listen to it again and again, I will enjoy it more and more.
Yeah, riding off of that, I just wanted to add one last thing, that I think this is really the first like multi-track project we've gotten from Fox Stevenson, where it feels like he's just being very real and genuine with like his experiences and his his feelings and things like that. Even if it does come across a little over the top at points, I can really appreciate the album for bringing that forward. So that's pretty much all I have to say about it. If you had to rate the album from 0 to 10, what would you think for my description?
For your channel only. For your channel only. No.
Yes.
We can do like 0.5s and stuff, yeah? Or is it just like...
Go for it.
Okay. I think at the moment, I'm going to go for a 5.5.
Really?
Okay. But I think that over time could very easily become a 6 or a 6.5, maybe. But yeah, somewhere between the kind of 5 and maybe... No, 4.5 for me seems a bit too harsh. So I think I'm somewhere between the 5 and the 6.5 realm. I'd say that, yeah.
Cool.
What about yourself?
Yeah, I'm probably feeling like a solid 7 about this thing. Like, originally, I'd say on my first couple listens, I was kind of in that same realm. But as I've come to, every time I listen to this, I'm thinking more and more like, oh, I could probably bump that up a half a point. I could probably bump it up another half point. And eventually, like, I'd say on my first listen, I was probably somewhere in like the 5.5, 6 range. But, as I've gotten more familiar with it and been able to enjoy different aspects of it than I did on my first run through, it's definitely gone more up into the 7 highly enjoy territory. So
interesting.
I could see this one ending up maybe not quite in my top 10 this year, but it's for sure, if not, it's going to be an honorable mention, I can imagine, because I think this is a really well put together pop album, some great infusions, and if you guys aren't subscribed to Connor already, make sure to. I'm going to have a link to his channel in the end card. If you haven't listened to this album for yourselves, which I'd be very surprised, many of you watching we're probably closing in on an hour here, long video, I'd be very surprised if you clicked on this without having listened to it. But if you haven't, I'll have the Spotify link down in the description below. And if you have listened to it, make sure to let us know what you think down in the comment section. If you enjoy content like this, make sure to subscribe and leave me a like. If you enjoyed this, once again, huge shout out to Connor for featuring on this one. I know it must have been at least somewhat uncomfortable because it's a very differently designed project than a lot of the stuff that you review. I really, I think I mentioned this at the beginning, but I really, really enjoyed kind of digging into something that wasn't particularly heavy. So, and I look forward to doing that again at some point. So yeah, don't feel like you have to, I don't know, hold back on suggesting that stuff for us to talk about. One thing that I was actually going to mention that I didn't is that because you review dark electronic music, and I guess this album would kind of fall into that category, but in a different way than usual, because it's not like sonically dark, it's like lyrically and thematically more dark. Yeah. So I thought I'd bring that up. But anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you want to see more content with Connor, make sure to let me know. Next video will probably be on his channel. But anyway, I'm Landon Remixes.
And I am Nawtystep.
And we'll see you guys later. Peace.
Peace.